Hello, everyone. Good evening, afternoon, evening, it's evening. Um, I'm Jeremy, as I was introduced. I'm excited to see you here. Before I kind of dig into stuff, I would just want to ask a couple of questions. How many of you have an Amazon Echo or some type of that? All right, so half of you. How many of you got them on the deal for Christmas? They're like 50% off, all that, yeah. How many of you have a Google Home? Okay, almost the same. How many of you have Siri or something like that on your phone? How many of you use like the Google Assistant on the phone? Okay, so most of you use your voice in order to control things today already. So I think this is going to be a bit more interesting than when I first started down this journey of understanding conversational experiences. Because when I started back in 2016, yeah, Siri was there, but that was about it. Amazon Echo was there, but it was still gaining traction, and a lot of folks hadn't put a lot of energy into purchasing these devices yet. So I had one of the first Echoes, and it has opened up my way of thinking about interacting with devices and what it means for us as developers to build these kinds of experiences. So since you all have one of those, or just about all of you have one of those devices, this is going to give you an insight into what kinds of things you might be able to build, whether it's using the web or going with the actual device to build things that run on a Google Home or on the Alexa platform. These things all translate and allow you to build these kinds of experiences that will start to be really, really important. Before we go too far, this is just a little bit more about me. I am a UI engineer at VMware, so I work on the Clarity UI project. That's my wife and two daughters who hopefully are in bed. So please pray for that and for my wife. She's great for letting me do these things occasionally. Not too often, but occasionally. So I'm part of being in the Google Developer Expert Program is that I get to speak to folks like you. I spend time talking to you and understanding what you do with these technologies, what you would like to do with these technologies. My focus is in Angular and in the Google Assistant platform. So if you have experience in either of those, whether or not it's related to this talk or not, happy to talk about that, especially later at the after event. I have two books. My Angular in Action book is literally going to print this week, so I am ready for that. It's a long journey to write a book. It's been about 2.5 years in the making. So if you don't clap for anything but that would be most appreciated. Yeah. So I feel a lot better after having that off of me. Yeah. Well, so I started in the betas, and every week it broke. So, so at some point I'm just going to slow down. I'm also a home brewer and certified beer judge. So later on, if you buy me a drink, I'll be glad to tell you what I think of it. And I live in Austin, Texas. This is a bit about Clarity. If you haven't heard of it, it's similar to material design in the sense that it describes not just UI components to use in your application, but also how to design your application structurally from a UX perspective. So it's more than just components, it's actual guidelines on when do I use a modal or not. There's a wizard. How does that wizard impact my user experience? So I suggest you take a look at it. That's the link to it at the top. And thank you for the invitation here. It's wonderful to see you all here. And I left the beach yesterday. I was visiting family in Houston, and so I was on a beach yesterday and in snow today. It's wonderful to experience this. I'm sure you all are used to this, but it was a little shocking. Don't worry, I grew up in the northern parts, so it's not totally unexpected, but it's just been a while. So kind of to set the scene, before we think about building our own experiences, there's a little bit of history that we can take a look at to see what things might be like in the future. I like art, movies and things because they tell us a story, especially science fiction. They tell us a story about ourselves, often set in the future, but they tell us the reality of today. And this one is perhaps familiar to some of you. This is The Voyage Home, Star Trek IV. This is a clip from it. If you haven't seen the movie, it has something to do with going back in time to get a whale to save the world. It's worth watching. It's a little confusing from that description, but just watch it. And in this scene, this gentleman here this is 1986, I believe. So he's in 1986. People from Star Trek have traveled from 2000 something, I don't know, 22 something or other, I can't remember, from the future to 1986 in order to try to save the world by getting a whale before they go extinct and blah, blah, blah. So they're trying to get something in order to help them go back to the future. They need a part or some piece of material, and this gentleman can help them. So before any further ado, let's go full screen.
You're joking. Perhaps the professor could use your computer.
Now take a look at this interaction.
Computer? Computer? Ah. Hello, computer.
Just use the keyboard.
Keyboard. How quaint.
The commentary. And then check out this. How many of you have one of these? And I don't know how, he's only typing like 3 characters. And it's amazing. Like, the future has so much to behold. Much like that experience, Scotty is, well, he walks up to this device, and his first inclination is to speak to it. And I believe that's foreshadowing of our reality. I've had one in my house for, I guess, 3 years, and I don't turn on the radio any other way. I don't turn some of the lights on or off any other way now. And it's become ingrained in not just my life, but my 2-year-old daughter, or she's 3, goodness. My 3-year-old daughter, who will go off, and she plays Frozen a lot. So I'm really glad that she knows how to ask for that. But the experience is natural for her because she knows how to speak, but she doesn't necessarily know how to interface with all these devices or control things, turn on the radio, blah, blah, blah. This kind of experience is natural and it's empowering. And so this is my thesis, that applications of tomorrow, and actually today, I've been saying this is a future thing, but there's a lot of this that can start today. We'll use natural language to improve the user experience. That's not always going to be verbal. Okay, chatbots show the rise of being able to talk and typing things. It's natural language is at the core of it. But verbally speaking is the space in which I think there's the most to gain and which will be the most familiar to people as well. When we talk about building applications, I think most of us come from the perspective of building web applications. If you're interested in Angular, then that's probably why you might be here tonight. And this is, the World Bank collects demographic and all kinds of information about countries around the world. It has it from 1960 on, and it collects the GDP, it has population data, it has crime information, all kinds of stuff. It's got literally thousands of different metrics that it keeps track of for every country, to the best of its ability, at least. Not every country has data available for it. But this application is a good application. I don't want to harp on it at all. It's an interesting way to sift through their data and experience what you might have a question for, you can get answers to. So one example might be you want to learn about the population trends for a particular country. Maybe it's if you're looking at the list here, it could be Armenia or Belgium, whatever the country might be, or you might want to compare several countries to each other and see what is the population trend. Is it going up or down? Are they, maybe we know there's some migration happening between 2 countries, and you can see that when they chart it or display it for you. So I want to take a look at this as a traditional UI experience where people have to click and type in order to achieve an answer to that question. So if I go back to the website and we bump this up, the layout gets a little funky at larger sizes here, so I'll do my best. So first off, this is just the World Development Indicators database. There are other databases. And I've done this a few times. I know what to look for here, but imagine this is your first time coming in. So we want to pick a country. Please tell me a country that you would like to learn about. Anyone? Afghanistan. Well, you pick the first one. Pick one that's further down the list you can't see. Zimbabwe. All right, so I'm going to start scrolling to find Zimbabwe, which, by the way, is also easy. So thank you. All right, so select Zimbabwe. Okay, great. That's the country I want. Now what do? Okay, I'm going to close this. I happen to know I need to now select. Oh, I need to reload the page. I'm sorry. I forget to do this sometimes. It times out if you load the page and then don't
Yeah, because a new
act.
language might come, you know.
I don't know. It's got like a 15-minute timeout, and I loaded it early. Okay, so I selected the country again. Now I wanted population trends. Okay, so I'm going to start scrolling. Now you can see there are 1,574, if you can see that number. So I'm still in the A's. I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to type, press the P here. Still looking, people. What do you think? People, persistence. Did I miss it? What if I do population? Enter. 212. Okay, that's fewer. Now I'm too far. Rural population, where might you be? This probably would be my best guess. Population total. And time, let's just say the last 20 years. And then apply changes. Voila, Zimbabwe. As a table, let's say I want it as a chart. And when it scales the page, it looks flat all the time whenever I do this. So I think the number's going up. So we have just under 12 here and about 16 million here. So this line should look a little bit more dramatic, I think, but it's going up. So the trend should be positive for Zimbabwe question. And then we can go back and look at the specific numbers of how many per year and information like that. So this is a traditional experience. These are the things you're probably building. These are the things that I have been building most of my career. And the problem is, when we think about that experience, it's actually cumbersome because I'm spending a long time and making a lot of decisions along the way. I start by picking a country. I start then go figure out which of those series metrics that I want. And I already knew which ones, but more than likely you're going to do trial and error on that for 10 minutes before you find the right one. And then time. Do you care about the last 20, 30, how many years? These are decisions. These are maybe micro decisions that you make without thinking seriously about them, but they are impediments to getting the answer to the functional question, what's the population trends for Zimbabwe? So I did that. I don't know, it took a little bit longer than usual because I was reloading the page, but 30 to 60 seconds, let's say. That's an average experience. But I said the sentence what I wanted in 3 or 4 seconds. So there's a lag in time. These experiences are designed in order to give you all the visual information to process and to filter down that data. And the question is, all of that thinking is mentally taken away inside of your head, and maybe as a developer you're more or less aware of it. Sometimes we're less aware of the impediments we place in people's ways, and sometimes we're fully aware that this is extremely cumbersome for people. But a lot of people would sit down and look at this and be overwhelmed and would take some time, and they'd almost want to look at the documentation or something in order to process that information. Again, it's not that this is a bad website, but it is a difficult experience in general, regardless of how you design that. You have to make so many decisions along the way. So why can't I just go ahead and speak my intention? What do I want to see? And have that be returned and displayed for me. So I thought I can do that. Well, I hoped I could do that when I decided to do this. I said, okay, let's try this out. Now, to make this a little bit more interesting, I need to get my phone, which you told me not to use, but I need it. So, I do need to use the Google Assistant app. So I have the app on my phone. I used to try to bring it here, and it's setting it up a pain on every new Wi-Fi connection. So once the app came out, I was very excited. So I can just ask for this. So what do we say? Zimbabwe, population trends for Zimbabwe. Show me the population trends. Oh, shoot, I forgot. Talk to my test app.
All right, here's the test version of my test app. Welcome to the Visual Databank app. What world data would you like to see?
Show me population trends for Zimbabwe.
Okay, here you go.
Okay. Population trends for Zimbabwe. Hey, it still figured it out. Okay. That's not quite right. Okay. Talk to my test app. Apparently I did not enunciate.
Say it again.
Talk to my test app.
Sorry, I can't help.
Oh, I'm still in it. Shoot, this is one of the experiences I got to iron out, isn't it? Talk to my test app.
Sure, here's the test version of my test app.
Show me the population trends for Zimbabwe.
Let me get that data.
Okay, this is what we're looking for. So this is.
Can you say that again?
Oh, it keeps wanting me to ask for more stuff. Okay, so this is the same data charted out. Now the scale looks a little bit more clean. So I think it's from this is 1960. So this includes a bit more data than we selected. But I was able to speak, now barring the flubbering of words, I was able to speak what I wanted and have that result come up. And you saw it was displayed here on the screen. So I spoke to basically my Google Home, which is the same experience, whether it's on the app or in the actual device. And I'll explain how it processes all that, relays that, and ends up on the screen. But you saw what was said. It transcribes it, understands what I said, and there's a portion of it that needs to process it and understand the intention behind it and then generate that result. But from a consumer perspective, from a user perspective, hey, this is what I want. And I can say other things. I can also type here and get a similar experience. Show me the most populous countries. And this is written, but it experiences the same thing because it's natural language. So these are the countries sorted by population according to 2015 data. I think I just hard-coded that for some reason. But anyways, and I can see and paginate between the top few of them here. So this information becomes visible for me. It's easy to parse. Listing the top 10 countries, which you can ask Google to do, or you can ask Alexa to do, and it'll start listing them, and then you will forget what the third country was. By the time the 10th one rolls around, you'll have forgotten most of what you just heard. But if you see the list here, that will reinforce your understanding. Certain types of information and experiences are inherently better consumed visually, but accessing what you want from them is still easier done verbally. So it's an interesting paradigm when you think about mixing these experiences together to create something a little bit more engaging than just a typical website that has a bunch of filters and things like this. I really think the statement that I said was very clear about this is what I want to see, and the computer, the process, eventually filtered that out into understanding what to display back on the screen. Here are the things that come into play. So there's actions on Google, there's Dialogflow, Firebase, and then ultimately Angular. This is actually one setup. There are different options and tools that you can use in order to make all this work. This is this is sort of the Google ecosystem of pieces. So actions on Google and Dialogflow and Firebase are all part of Google's cloud platform, and obviously work very well for building things for the Google Home, Google Assistant. But there are other things as well. I'm not going to go into that, but there are other options. And then Angular, of course, to display the UI that results. So I speak, and it's going to go off to actions on Google, which is going to do some processing. It's going to go then to Dialogflow, which does more processing. I'm going to tease out the difference in just a moment. It's going to forward information to Firebase, which then forwards information to Angular. Let's start off at the top. Oh yeah. I keep flipping between these and the screen sharing thing. So actions on Google. Actions on Google is I think of it as a router. So if you have an Alexa or a Google Home, when you ask it questions, there's really two ways that it will respond. One is it'll just tell you the answer. So you ask things like, how many teaspoons are in a tablespoon? That's probably the main platform itself. So the Alexa platform or the Google Assistant platform can handle a large amount of typical queries like that. Secondly, it may hand you off to an action, something or skill in Alexa speak, where it will fulfill that information request for you. So anything that has to do with your lights and your smart home devices, those things are going to be built by a manufacturer of that thing. They're going to integrate it, and then when you speak to it, you say, turn on my lights, there's a handoff, and you're actually being passed off to that provider. So there's some different types. I have one that has the space station. You can ask, when does the space station fly over next? And if you're asking that question, my app is the best suited to answer it. So Google will say something like, here is a space tracker, and take you to that app, and then you change into a new context. If Google information is available, like those cards at the top of Google searches, sometimes you see little helpful information. Those actually are often what you see or hear if you ask the same question to the assistant. You'll get those kinds of snippet cards verbally. So a lot of that information is very relatable. So if you could Google a question and get a card, you can probably ask it a question and get a similar response. Or you can ask for an action. So the Google Assistant platform may fulfill the request for basic types of questions or general knowledge questions, I like to say, or it will forward you. So in a lot of ways, it's like a router. It's going to figure out who's best suited to fulfill this request. In most cases, people will either ask for you after they know what the name of your app is. So I don't have a name for this because it's a test app, and I can't publish it because it's not functional for other folks right now. But if you ask for my space tracker app, you'll get it. Otherwise, you implicitly will request something that will eventually get routed to you based on what Google or Alexa knows about it. So you might ask for cat jokes, which there are dozens, if not hundreds, of cat joke apps out there. And it'll pick the best one for you, or it'll pick one of them at least. I'm not sure any of them are super awesome. I have 2 cats. I love them, but enough's enough. So the Google Assistant, and it comes with the Actions platform here. It comes with like a simulator, and you get to define the application itself. So it's sort of like an App Store directory piece here. Let me take a look at like the home page here. So there's a simulator, and this is my test app. You can fill in all these types of pieces of information if you've ever submitted something to the App Store of any type. It's very familiar. It's basically the same concept. So it's a way of describing your app and then being available for the platform to get routed to. So it's not a lot for us to do there. It's a tool to bring us closer to the next step, which is Dialogflow or some other processing tool. Dialogflow is a couple of different things rolled into one. It's about bringing the raw text that was said or whatever was written and trying to understand it more than just, okay, these are the words that were said, but this is what they mean. And we use the term intention a lot. So what was their intention with this statement? So we're mapping languages here. So I don't know if you can see this. It's a little bit small. I have some other examples that are a little bit bigger in just a moment. But basically, we're working through mapping language to parameters to figure out what somebody says. In my example here especially, I said, show me the most populous countries. Some keywords in there are sort of like SQL query parameters, right? So you want to sort, you want to filter. These things you can do as well with Dialogflow to say, okay, I say something like this. When I use a number here, that's important. When I use a name of a country here, that's important. And it helps normalize that information so when your application gets it, you have a payload, a JSON payload with the parameters and normalized data. Somebody might say these 3 statements. Show me a list of countries by population, display a table, blah, blah, blah. These 3, I want to have the same experience, but you don't want to force somebody to say the same thing every time. It's not going to happen, for one. They're going to forget, or they're going to be one word off, so it's not like you want to just regex parse this stuff. Although I've heard of people who try, and that limits you extremely quickly. So what Dialogflow does is helps you understand, all right, these things are the same. Give me a sample of things that people might say. Let's map the parts of them that are parameters and values that I need to know about. And then I'm going to do some machine learning stuff. I'm going to map out statements that people say. And if they're off, I might say, show me a list of countries by population. I might say, just show me countries by population. So I might have omitted something. But it'll say, those things are almost the same. Correlate them, and it's going to make that model smarter. So over time, you're going to get more and more matches that will make it even smarter and able to understand even in more different types of statements that people might say. So in my example, I only put about 5 ways to speak in it, but there's dozens of ways of asking the same question, and the machine learning helps to sort that out for me. So Dialogflow does that for you. I highly recommend using a tool for that because writing your own natural language processor is non-trivial, especially if you're going to do it in Node. which is how I started. And once I found Dialogflow, I didn't go back. So the real challenge of natural language processing is understanding what people say and how to build the models, and then all of the training and this stuff is taken for you. It's a service. It's also free. So why not? It also gives me some options to do stuff like fallbacks. In this case, I don't have metrics about crime. And so I can have it catch that and respond with, I'm sorry, and prompt you to do something that I can provide. It also has other types of things where if you ask him like, hey, how are you doing? Which people do. If you've ever had somebody come in and be like, oh, this is one of those devices, and they're like, hi. Or they start to insult it, which is what happened with my brother-in-law. And they fight back. Don't worry. They're fine. They're not going to be hurt. But you can enable little features that will let the feedback loop keep going so that it doesn't just fall over and say, oh, I don't understand what to do with this information. There's neat little tricks like that which would be a lot more difficult to build. And for those of you who know English really well, think about trying to build this for another language as well. So it has multi-language capabilities. You're going to start building something out that works in the US and in the UK. You probably want to talk to somebody who's British and understands, or from the UK who understands British English and can correct all of our English, because it's sometimes completely different. It's not just the words they use, but it's how they use them and the sentence structures. So you can do like American English and then British English and even German and things like this. And we all know that English is really crazy sometimes. So especially just even in the US, but across the world, English is not the same. So that machine learning piece is invaluable. Once it's done, it's going to fire off that payload of information. It's going to say, what did you say? Here's the parameters I was able to determine. And what it's going to do right now is actually calls a Firebase cloud function. That's just a little Node.js script that really all it does is put the payload that was requested into the database. My database, I'm just using the real-time database in Firebase if you're familiar with it. If you're not, it's just a kind of a NoSQL type database. But with the added bonus of anybody connected to it can get instant updates every time pieces of information are added or removed. So I use that capability with Angular in order to synchronize when the Dialogflow is done. Basically, once Firebase gets it, my Angular application gets it as well, and then knows how to decide what to do. So yeah, this is it. It just pushes all this data. It happens in real time. I actually put a delay in the UI for 3 seconds before it renders because sometimes the loop of me asking and getting the result was so quick that I was showing it to people and they're like, what changed? The chart's different. It's all different. And they're like, what? Oh, yeah, you're right. And it was too confusing. So I actually put in an overlay that's like, here's what you said. Give it 3 seconds, and then it draws. And it doesn't need that long, but it just makes everybody feel like it works. So I thought, well, let's keep doing it. So Firebase is another wonderful free tool for working with this. The Dialogflow, Google Actions, all that, a lot of the documentation and some of the tooling, even inside of those different platforms. They're different products and platforms, but they're like cross-pollinated so that you can write your cloud function in Dialogflow. So there's some nice tooling between them so that, at least for basic prototyping and stuff, that's easy. You don't have to go about the ceremony of building all of this stuff out. The last piece is Angular. Yay, the piece you might be most familiar with. And actually is the least exciting because most of what I've written is just to receive data and then either show a chart or show a table with the data that is there. I wrote around 200 lines of actual code for all of this, the cloud function and the Angular app. I generated an app with the CLI. So yes, there's code there, but most of my code that I wrote is just to parse the response and then display those results. So it's around 200 lines of code. And it just blows my mind. This is so easy to do, or to make possible, at least at a basic level, that everyone should be able to figure out some of the basics and figure out how they could start to integrate this into their workflow. I have an example also, but I don't like to use it with slides, where I say like, next slide, next slide. It gets a little annoying because it breaks up the flow of the presentation. So I took that one out. But your application could do anything that you want because when you send back information from that payload, you can have those parameters. When I say next slide, previous slide, go to slide 20. These things can all be presented to the UI in such a way that it knows, hey, this is what I do. So the UI does have logic to render itself, but it's expecting a payload. That payload could come from anywhere. It doesn't have to be Dialogflow. I could be generating that with some other type of system and service, but as long as it, in the way I wrote it at least, as long as it passes that data into it, the UI would know how to react. And so they're decoupled in a lot of ways. And I think that's also important. I'm not going to get into a lot of the code unless people are really interested in it. We can do that, but it's really more about how these pieces wire together and work to provide this experience. So this is all of it. I didn't actually get a slide in here, but there's another way that some of this can be done that I have built with, you get rid of the actions on Google part, and you go straight to Dialogflow, but you use speech recognition in the browser. So WebKit, Chrome at least, has speech recognition built in. Firefox does, behind a flag. It's kind of hard, but you can get to it. And it may eventually get elsewhere. So the web can also be used as sort of the router, the entrant point. And so I can also show with this request button. And it takes a second. Did I do it right? Display a chart of the smallest countries. Oh, and I forgot I added this. This is a nice little piece. Like I asked for something, but I didn't display. I didn't ask for the metric. I just said smallest countries. I should have said smallest countries by population. Or I could infer that they meant by population, but I didn't actually write that in. So that's a part of the usability, so I have to request again. The microphone pickup piece, I actually did this like an hour before, so display a chart of the smallest economies. There we go. It's supposed to show that it's listening, but I was having trouble with that. So we're able to actually use speech recognition in the browser. That was done in the browser with the speech APIs. It understood what I said, and it's pretty good. And that bakes right into your browser. Passes that information to Dialogflow, who understands the intention behind it, and then the flow continues. So it's not the only entry point. So Dialogflow is just a service that takes text. It's built in and works well with Google, the Google Assistant stuff, but you can capture text anywhere, in any way, and pass it along as long as you just use the API. I think that's a really powerful part of the overall system as well. Now, like I demonstrated, you can say what you want to say, and if things aren't quite right, the computer still may not get it all the way. And or it might do what you said, and maybe you were misspeaking. And so you have to be very careful in thinking through the design and the experience that is provided. And this is the part actually I like the most. The coding is fun, but thinking through how do people actually engage with this? How do they talk to it? How can people use my application with voice? Whether you're working on internal systems in a company or you're in a public space with advertising perhaps, people will use that in different contexts and in different ways. And there's opportunities there. Lots of really interesting stuff that I've heard a few examples from, and I want to share a couple. One was in a surgery room, or operating room, I guess is the word. Everything's clean, right? You can't touch anything except for the medical instruments, and obviously you're scrubbed up, and they always walk around like this, at least in the shows. I haven't been in one, so I don't know, but anyways, there's a computer in there to log the actions that they're doing. And I was told by somebody that there's a complicated foot pedal way to like select things on the screen so they don't touch anything with their hands. They remain sterile. Why wouldn't they want to just be able to say, log this, and keep a running record of all that information, not just as an audio file, but actually log it in the system and transcribe that and process it inside. Someone else has an idea of like a bunch of panels in like a security ops kind of or network operations or something like this. Some sort of sensitive thing. You've got a lot of displays. Maybe it's the matrix, whatever. But you have a lot of things going on, and you might want to say, pull up this on screen 3 instead of like dragging or moving things around the screen or having keyboard shortcuts. Somebody can come in and just say, show me node 5 on screen 2. And pulls that up for you. So lots of ways that it can shortcut some of these more difficult experiences and interactions by just speaking. I have a plan to build essentially like a greenhouse management system. It's going to keep track. I have sensors and things, and I can build out with a Raspberry Pi. I can build out sensors that will collect temperature and what's the water flow doing, and when was the last time it was that it rained, or how much sun did it get. All of this information, and use that to process it. But I can walk in and say, how's my greenhouse? I can ask, like, how much water do we have left, or how many nutrients have been put in today, or when's the next plant due? Because I can maybe even have like image learning to take pictures of the plants and figure out what's the date to maturity, that kind of stuff. Like, I can automate a lot of cool stuff, but voice would be a huge part of that. Not all of it would make sense to always be accessible by voice, but a lot of it would be really useful to be able to ask those things. Your hands are dirty, right? You're in the garden. Maybe you don't want to go over and get your screen all wet or dirty. So this is lots of scenarios where people have limitations. My wife often is carrying a child. She can't find her phone because they put it under the couch. Something like this. She can still ask for weather information. She can still control things in the house. So we sometimes have temporary disabilities. Whether it's permanent or temporary, we have these issues that prevent us from interfacing with typical devices, the traditional UIs that we have. But often we don't want to exclude those things and only do voice experiences. And I think with the Amazon's Echo Show or the Spot, the little circle one, and Google's coming out with smart displays soon with a couple of partners, so they'll have a screen attached to them. Things like cooking with recipes will be much easier. You'll be able to show things. You have your security camera system, right? You might get an alert and you want to pull it up on the screen. You can do that. You don't have to pull out your phone. These kinds of things are going to be really, really exciting, and we can be part of that, even in the web space. This is one of the AIY kits, if you've heard about them. How many of you have heard of them? Are you familiar with this at all? Okay, awesome. So they're really cool. I should have brought one in person, but they're only about this big. It's just a Raspberry Pi, but has a couple of other pieces. And this is basically a Google Home that you can build for like $30. The kit's like $10, and you can get 10 or 20 depending on whether it's on sale, and then a Raspberry Pi, so $40. And it has all the stuff you need to run and build your own Google Home device. But you can also use it to loop back and display something on a monitor. And so one of the things I'm building is I want to just like mount. Every year you get those calendars for 2018, 2019, blah, blah, blah. You put them on the wall. You keep track of dates and things like that. Yeah, neither do I, but it's on the wall. I would rather have one with my calendar on it from my phone or my Google account and my wife's account, and just have it displayed there and be able to walk up to it and be like, okay, what's today? And it actually shows me today. Or am I free next week? And ask these kinds of questions, which you can kind of do already with your phone and things like that. But I want to be able to engage it visually. And so it's not just about building the little home device, but you can integrate it with the web at that point. So when actions are asked for, it can loop back and then display stuff through the Raspberry Pi, which has a HDMI cable, and all you do is plug it into a TV or a screen. These things are really cool. Within an hour, you can get it up and running with the Raspberry Pi. It's also Python, so you might have to learn a bit of Python if that's not your space. That's okay. White space matters, and that's all you need to know. So a couple of things before we get all the way done. There's a lot of interesting challenges because people have been clicking and typing for a few decades, but people have been speaking for millennia. So we have social norms to deal with. We have practical experiences, privacy. We have ethics, things like this, which are not cut and dry. We need to make money somehow doing these things, right? So how do we engage people properly? This is a challenge because this is a space that's still new, and we just don't have a lot of decorum. We're trying a lot of things out. what's creepy, what's not creepy, what's private, what's not. Things in the home, like the Google Home and Alexa, those things are in the house, but now they're pushing to put them into business space. What is that like? You have a device in the middle of the table. You say, okay, Google, push to production. Can you do that? What kind of things happen there? That's an example, but what about like HR information? How much of that can be available through that system? Be careful in considering those things. You want to experience a lot with voice, but without putting information or people at risk. There's some use cases where you can get voice profiles and limit data based on who's asking, but who knows who's in the room? Anything I say out loud, my wife can hear downstairs. So I can ask what do I want to listen to? She can hear. So it's not private, but it's private to our house, and it's fine. But in the workspace, that's different. In a public space, you go up to an advertisement, and it asks you to just request, maybe it's got like shoes, and you can request your size or something like that, and it'll show you all the shoes in your size. Do you want people to know your shoe size? Maybe that's not private, but maybe it is. Some people might be sensitive about that. They don't want to know that people don't want to share that information. So I think that's a really important part that I didn't realize at first how just challenging this is. So your experience in your application, you're going to know the best about what those things might be. I don't know in your context, but keeping that in mind early and very beginning of your design will help a lot throughout. So I'm curious if you have ideas on what you could build or what you'd like to build. Let me know if you want to share some of those thoughts. I'm going to keep collecting those ideas, and I share them with people. If they're private, that's fine. I won't share them. But I do like to hear what folks have in their mind, what kinds of things they might be able to do, and be able to help as well if I can. And the code for this is at this link. I just pushed it up. So I updated it. It had been a little bit stale, so there might be a few little issues. If there are, just let me know. I'll fix them up. But that's the link at the top, and then that's my Twitter handle if you want to ever chat at me or just let me know what you're building. I'd be happy to hear from you. And so that's what I have. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to dive into it. We can talk about the code if you want. We can talk about the experience, but happy to have anything you have. Yes? Okay.
You said it took 2.5 years to write the book. What stemmed you to start writing books?
The experience of writing.
Yeah.
So the question is, why did I want to write a book?
Yeah.
Or two of them, in fact. My wife thinks that I'm on track to have a book for every child, so she doesn't want me to get another book thing going. And if we do have another kid, she still doesn't want me to have another book. So my thing about writing and books in particular, the long format works well for me in how I think, because I like to go through things. Quick snippets and blog posts, those are great, and a lot of people enjoy that format and work that way. But I like to wrap up the whole experience, and that's part of what I think about voice is really interesting, is that it's not just about a quick answer and get in, get out. It's about building an experience that provides a solution to it and works well with the life cycle of everything. So you need to think through the whole process, and I like to bring those things to life. And a lot of the reason the book works is because I write really big examples. And so short examples on blog posts, you basically all you're doing is you're writing what the code does, unless you get to the point of writing a book to explain how the code works and why you did it that way. If you want to do that for all of Angular, a book is the best format. Videos can work well too. I find them tedious to watch myself, so I find the book format easier to parse and reference and go back to. So that's why I really wanted to work on that. Yeah.
You mentioned relative to the fact that you didn't publish this app. My question surrounds the notion of publishing and how are you able to publish something to make available but only internal enterprise only. So for example, I want to write an application for charter only, for charter employees. And so in other words, if you're on this network, then I want to write an app and you can ask these specific questions that give out confidential information that we don't necessarily want to share.
Okay. So then you can't route it through the web. Yes, so there are a couple of platforms that do these types of experiences without going to the network. They're more intensive because you build models and deploy them. So you build a model and essentially export it and then can run that system sort of as a standalone, kind of like your own system without being cloud-based. Mycroft is one of them that I've looked at and done a little bit with, so you can take a look at that. It has a lot of the same things about building your intentions, and it's same rules apply. But at the end, you get something that you can export and then run on a system to build those experiences on top of, and then you've got to wire up the pieces, of course, yourselves. But those are your options. Is going for there's a couple others that I can't remember all the names of right now, but there are a couple of them that are embeddable, basically. So you can embed them on like a Raspberry Pi, or you can make them cloud-based internally if you've got an internal cloud kind of thing, and use APIs to access them. Anything else?
As you work with voice interfaces, how do you deal with kind of I guess it's the complexity with spoken language, but like when someone speaks to another person, oftentimes there'll be like pauses and things that seem to, from my experiences with like voice assistants and things, those types of breaks, and maybe I misspoke a word and I re-say that word. Are those things that are already getting better, or as you're trying to design an interface, how do you handle those types of complexities?
Yeah, great question. So when you're designing this experience, how do you ensure, I think the real question underneath of it is, how do you keep users on the happy path so that as things happen, whether they fall off of the train or something lags too long and the system kind of kicks in, how do you handle that? So a good example that I face all the time is we have a thermostat upstairs and downstairs, and I'll say, set the heat to 72 or whatever. And then it'll be like, I found 2 thermostats. Please tell me which one you would like next time, or something like this. And it just ends. So I have to repeat. I have to say, okay, set the upstairs thermostat, just because I forgot to say upstairs. I'm upstairs talking to a device that is located upstairs, and the system profile knows this, but it shouldn't like kick me out of the system. What I want it to do is say, okay, I found two thermostats. Which one would you like to set? And then I can say the upstairs one, instead of me repeating the entire thing. So when there are experiences where there might be lags, this happens a lot. It's like, oh, hey, can you play this CD? And you forget the name, so it knows that you want to play music, but then it's like starts playing some random playlist that it thinks you might like, or whatever the experience is. Often it's not what I want. What you need to do is keep track of the information you have and don't have. And you introduce a little bit of state there. And I didn't demonstrate it, but I can ask the system, right? Or we saw it on the screen. It said, like, if I ask about crime data, my application doesn't have the crime data. I didn't export that. So it says, I'm sorry, I don't have that information. Would you like to learn about this or this? I give you options. I try to continue the process. And that's part of the design. Because when you talk to people and you have a conversation, you don't just like, throw an error and walk away. That's what you do in all other applications. But you can't do that with it. Voice is very emotional. People get mad. People get offended by these types of experiences. I know your voice starts raising, right? If you have to repeat yourself, the second time the sentiment analysis will be like, this person's more angry than the first time, like guaranteed. And so you have to keep track of, okay, they asked for music. Let's say that's the thing you want. Then it should be, okay, that's the part I heard. I don't know what music they want. And you can say, would you like to play a station or play a particular artist, right? Fill in and prompt them with things. And Dialogflow is really good about helping you with that. Follow-up intentions lets you fill in the gaps when parameters were missed or when you don't have enough information. Another example is maybe you want to fill out kind of an order, right? So you might call up the pizza place and say, I'd like to order a pizza. They shouldn't be like, okay, next time tell me everything you need on the pizza and then try again. No, it should be like, okay, what size pizza would you like? What toppings do you want? Would you like to add another pizza, or would you like to complete your order? You help people through that flow, and so the design part is really important. And a lot of people will use just they'll sit side by side before they code anything. Somebody will kind of script what they think works, just write it down or type it up, and someone will act like the robot, and someone will be the user, and they'll just have that conversation, and the person will read based on what lines they have, and then if there's tension there, they'll make notes that we need to change this, or we need to make it possible to have follow-ups. So it's a lot in the design, and it's a lot about thinking through those moments and being very vigilant that the user cannot make a mistake speaking, because speaking is so core to who we are, and if you screw it up, it's the computer's fault, and they'll give up and never come back, and a lot of times. So you really want to give them the best experience. It's okay to not understand somebody, right? When somebody's talking to you and you're like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't catch that, but you ask them to repeat it. So sometimes maybe it's just simple to repeat. So lots of ways, but those are the key big ones. Anything else? Yeah.
So you kind of clung to a Google, and I was wondering if there's a reason why you are, I don't know if you're being agnostic about of the two types or three types, four types of voice. Have you, from a development level, which one did you prefer and why? And then from an interaction level, which one did you prefer and why?
So the question is, which platform do I like to develop on best, and a little bit about why, and which one do I like to use best? I'll start with the ones I like to use. So I've used the Echo since it first came out. I pre-ordered it and forgot about it, and then it showed up one day, and I was like, I'm sorry, wife. Turns out it's the piece of technology she uses more than I do. But I have several of them now, and I have a show, and I like that a lot because I like the screen. I wish it did more. So my experience is, by habit, I've used the Echo the most, and I think that's true for a lot of folks. If you got an Echo and a Google Home, if you had one first, it's muscle memory. But also, how much have you set up the profiles and things like that correctly? So the Alexa has worked very well for my family. I like the Google Assistant accuracy a lot better for some general questions, because it's Google. It collects the world's general knowledge, whereas Amazon kind of has to cycle that information in from external sources. It does a pretty good job for a lot of verticals, but Google just has a wider spread set of things. So I tend to use one for music and one for other stuff. Development-wise, I like the Google experience better, although Alexa, literally like last week, just released their new console, and it's a huge improvement. If you've ever used AWS UI, there's a lot of jumping around and clunkiness sometimes to it. And it was a bit like that. Things are a bit more streamlined now. You kind of have different pieces. It actually looks a lot similar to Dialogflow and the way things are structured. A lot of these tools, not just the Googles and Alexa, but the Mycroft and the other couple other ones, Snips, those all kind of, you learn how to use one, it's almost transferable to the next one. So there's maybe some terminology change, but I find the Google ecosystem is just a little bit cleaner for me. Because you deploy like Lambda functions for AWS, and so like logs for that go somewhere else. And that's true actually for Firebase and Google Actions, but it's just, to me, the connection's a little bit tighter. Those things are probably going to get tightened up and made even easier over time. Yeah, there are platforms that they're like, you build it here and we deploy it everywhere. Actually, that's what Dialogflow does. You can deploy to a chatbot, you can deploy to Slack and Facebook, and you can actually build Cortana and Alexa projects from Dialogflow. So some of them are more versatile. Dialogflow used to be API AI, which was external to Google, and then they acquired it. So it had all those integrations already, and they've kept them up. So that's a part of it. I think the Dialogflow is just my favorite part of the overall ecosystem, but the new Alexa system is leaps and bounds ahead of where it was and will help them a lot. So I can't recommend one over the other as a de facto rule. You're going to have to work with both, basically. If you're going to build a voice action, you do want to work with both. If you're choosing a platform for like your company or something, well, there's Alexa for Business is getting started. I don't know a whole lot about that program, but that might put you in that box. Google might do something like that. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if other vendors come in and join that game. But if you're building for applications like this, you're gonna have to support them all. So it almost doesn't matter. Anything else? Yes.
So, in your experience, how easy or difficult it is to develop something like this, which does also remember the context, like you said.
Remember the context of where someone was?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Right. So, like you asked who's the president of the United States,
Uh-huh.
it replies back. Then you ask what's his age.
That's a
Like
great
that.
question. So basically the question is, through the conversation, how do you remember what came before it?
I mean, how easy or hard it is to implement that from a developer perspective.
It is a bit of a challenge to do, and you have to think through it, right? That's where the conversation design up front really pays dividends, because if you don't do it up front, you're going to reverse engineer a lot of stuff later to shim it in, and it's not going to be as easy. So think about those things ahead of time. But you have context, at least in Dialogflow, where you enter one type of question, and you can set a context, and then that context can be carried over between subsequent requests. And so you're analyzing this on stateless cloud functions. They run once, they're provided information at execution time, and then it's destroyed. So it's not like it's a stateful thing going on in the background with the session. But with the context, you can carry over that information. You can say, okay, we're starting to talk about this person. So maybe you're talking about famous people. The context could be set, and you could say, keep track of who that person is. And then when you ask follow-up questions, which Google is really good at, the Google Home is I think much stronger in that space than the Alexa platform, at least in my practice. So you can do that yourself too, but the context is the key way of doing that. But you also have access to kind of unique session IDs that you can maintain a session on your system that's handling the requests. So you can kind of key, all right, this is session ABC, and or this is conversation ABC, whatever the keyword is, and maintain that information yourself to some degree, and then discard it once that conversation, after 5 minutes, because it's no longer, people aren't going to keep talking for 5 minutes most likely. So there's a couple of ways. Some of it's with the system, and some of it's yourself. But it's certainly possible. Easier to do when you design ahead of time. Anything else? Awesome. Well, thank you.